As it's As it says at the beginning of the prayer of Vestreya, I also bow to bodhicitta which blocks all paths to lower realms, reveals the path to higher realms, and leads to freedom from age and death. Saving oneself from the sufferings of the lower realms, the suffering of samsara, and attaining the liberation of the arhatship, but leaving all other sentient beings suffering without any protector in the suffering of that. And so, in order to free all these other sentient beings from the suffering of samsara, what is absolutely necessary is the precious bodhicitta. And the root of bodhicitta is great compassion. And we say great compassion is unbiased to all sentient beings. It's for each and every sentient being that we need to develop our compassion. And so here and at this time that we've gathered here from all directions to come to this Kagyu Munlam, the reason why we're gathered here, it's like, maybe it's become like a tradition. Oh, we come here every year. As if it's just a habit that we come here. And there's no need to actually think about our actual motivation for coming here. If it's just we go because it's what we always do, then we aren't giving it much interest and we're not giving it much value to it. And so it's imperative that within our minds we have a special motivation and a special way of thinking when we gathered up here. This is extremely important. Otherwise, even if we don't have a great motivation for coming here, at least we've all gathered here, and it's a great fortune that we have arrived here. And so, please, everyone, please change your motivation, transform your motivation into one that is different from what you normally have, and have a different sort of motivation, a different way of thinking about things, a different attitude. Try to develop a different type of motivation. And if we come here in this, the Mahabodhi Temple in Bodh Gaya and gather the accumulations and purify our obscurations, then this is an especially great purpose, so we need to do that. Now, yesterday we talked about confession. How do we say misdeeds or wrongdoings or negativities? In the different philosophical schools of the Buddhism, there are many different ways of identifying misdeeds. In the Vaibhashika school, according to the teachings in the Tenjira, it's basically talked about as the actions of our body and our speech that are perceptible. And then in the Samsamsa school, it says the perceptible actions of our body, speech, and mind. But in any case, misdeeds come out of our mind. And so the mind is most important. It's like the seed so our unvirtuous actions are like seeds, and because of that seed, in the future we'll experience a painful full ripening. And so now, if we just as if we take that seed out of the ground, it will not grow into a tree. In the same way, if we remove that seed of the misdeeds, then it will not produce a full ripening. And so that is why we will not ripen to us. And so when there may be something that we have done even if we don't do any more than just one or two good things, if we use them as a way to purify our misdeeds, they are very powerful as an antidote for or a very powerful purification. For example, if someone falls on the ground, for example, it's like you pick them up off the ground. And in the same way, in that way, we need to purify ourselves of the bad karma. And so, in this way, here we have gathered at this, best of all places in Bodh Gaya, and we are talking about the best of ways of. We will be doing the ritual of Akchobi, which is the best of ways of purifying karma, and we have many people here. But the main root of it all comes down to is our mind. If we just recite the text with our mouths, but within our mind, we don't look at misdeeds as being misdeeds, and we just think about whatever at all, then that is a way of doing many wrongs. And so it is important that our minds and our mouths go together, and that we actually put this into practice is by doing these all together. So as I've said the reason why virtue is strong and unvirtue is weak is because the unvirtue has no support. It comes out of a confused mind, whereas virtue comes out of an unconfused mind, and therefore it has a good support. And so we need to use that which is, and so that which is has a good support and is stable will always overcome that which does not have a good support. So there's a good story about this, actually. There's a good story about confession in the beginning of the section about confession. There was a mountain, and on the top of this mountain there were two monasteries. One we can call them Monastery A and Monastery B. And so if we could say, if Monastery A, all of the monasteries in that were always criticizing each other and always felt about each other as enemies, and so they had a very horrible feeling about it. But in Monastery B, all of the monks were very harmonious. They all got along. They all got together. And they were all smiling at each other and had this wonderful feeling. So the master or the abbot of Monastery A sort of saw that situation. He was surprised at why would this be. And so he went into Monastery B. And so he asked to one of the small monks, one of the young monks there, a young novice monk. And he asked him this question. Now, in your monastery, he said, it's like everyone's always really happy and having a good time. Why is that? What is this because of? And so the young monk said, oh, that's because we always make lots of mistakes. We always make mistakes, and so that's what it's from. And so when you always make mistakes and things that aren't right, then the master had a lot of doubt about this. How can it be that if you're always making mistakes and doing wrong things, that you can have a good time and be happy? And when he thought about it, and then he saw something. He saw that there was a mop who was mopping things while he was going through. And then another one came out of the monastery and slipped on that. And so when the monk who had been mopping saw that someone saw this person slip and fall, then he went over to him and helped him up. He said, "Oh, it's all my mistake. It's my turn. I used too much water when I was mopping this morning, so I'm sorry. So it got really slippery and you fell." And then there was another monk. There was another monk standing there by the monastery. And he said, "Oh no, no! It was all my fault. It's all my fault that is that. And it's because I was the one who told you to mop the floor. And so everything is my mistake." And the guy who slipped, then he said, the monk who slipped, he said, then he got up, said, "No, no, 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 no! It's all my fault because I wasn't careful. That's why it happened." So the supervisor, the abbot from monastery A, so he understood. This is what is it? The little monk before, that little novice, he said when he said that we're always making mistakes and having problems, and so we all become harmonious. So he understands why it is that young monk said that. And so what do we think when we think about it? Why is that? Each individual person, each individual recognizes their own mistakes, their own problems, and everyone takes the responsibility and recognizes and admits it, and then because of that, everyone gets together well, and everyone feels that everyone gets together, gets along well. So if you don't admit your mistakes and don't recognize them, and then you walk around being prideful and being so boastful and prideful, then you don't fool anyone, you don't get along with anyone, and then you get into fights. And so that is the story. And so there's something to understand in that, isn't there? Now today, the fourth of the 10 great aspirations is the branch of rejoicing. And the aspiration of rejoicing reads at the bottom of page 112, "And I rejoice in all that is the merit of all the victors and the Buddhist children, of the self-Buddhas, learners and non-learners, of all the wanderers of the 10 directions." Now, the people whom we are rejoicing for is all the victors of the 10 directions, and all the Buddhist children. And so all the self-Buddhas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, the learners and the non-learners, and all the beings that have entered, who have not entered the path, in all the 10 directions. So there's no one who's not included in this. And so here, this is talking about 5 different types of people. So those who have entered the path of non-learning, the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas who are on the path, and the self-Buddhas and Shravakas, and then all of the beings who have not entered the path. And so, in brief, it's basically ourself and all others, ordinary individuals, and ordinary individuals and noble individuals have all accumulated through through 3 times many virtuous things, and that will produce a pleasant result, pleasant dominant result. For this, so it's like without any pride or without any boastfulness or any jealousy, if we rejoice in this and talk in this becomes a great source of merit. And if we rejoice in a great, merit, then we get the same amount of merit out ourselves. And if we rejoice in an even greater merit, then we get a greater. If we have a greater aspiration than the deed, then we get even more merit than that. So the greater rejoicing, the more merit we get from it, more merit we gain from it. And so then when we once again rejoice again in doing virtue, then we'll have more excitement about doing virtue again. And so for this reason, this rejoicing is like a wonderful practice. It's one of the most wonderful methods we can use. And so when we think about this, all of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, just as so just as so it's important for us to cherish our own self. And when we compare the amount of how much we appreciate ourselves with how much the Buddhas appreciate us, cannot even compare. We can't even dream about the wishes for the benefit of others that Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have. So when Pratyeka Buddhas and Shrakavas see and develop renunciation and give up any attachment to samsara that they see as being a pit of fire, then they can attain their own liberation. This is something that we can rejoice in. And when ordinary individuals who are bound by the three afflictions have almost no opportunity at all to develop any virtuous aspirations, but sometimes they not only develop a virtuous information, but they also do incredibly virtuous things. And this is an amazing, wonderful thing that happens. This is an incredible thing. And so when you take that as like an example and you think about all of the virtuous things that have been done, and without ignoring them or without thinking of them as small, we rejoice in them. It's extremely important to rejoice in this way. For example, when our teacher, the Buddhist Shakyamuni, developed bodhicitta, he made 500 aspirations for the benefit of beings in the times of the 5 generations. And all of the masters who have followed him, such as Nagarjuna, when Nagarjuna went to the land of the Nagas and brought the Prajnaparamita Sutras. This is what we say in Tibet, that he brought the Prajnaparamita Sutras. And in China they say that he brought the Gandavyuha Sutra, but in any case, when he brought the Mahayana Sutras, and also created all of the scriptures of the Mahayana and the collection of praises and so forth, he established the Mahayana. And then Asanga brought all of the 5 dharmas of Maitreya. And so these are what we call the lineage of vast action, the lineage of profound conduct, or profound view. And so these are all of the... then there are all the lamas who are within the lineage of this blessings, or the lineage of this transmission. And from all these masters, from the time they're born, begin to turn the wheel of Dharma in a vast way. And through turning that in a vast way, then all of the people who can see it, all the people we see who can see it, all of the non-humans we cannot see, are given an opportunity to be able to attain liberation and omniscience. And it is very important for us to rejoice in these incredible examples and incredible lives of such masters as this. Now, sometimes we also divide the teachings into sects. We think, oh, this is our view, this is our sangha, this is our way of doing it. We get a very sectarian view. And we rejoice in all the virtuous acts of our own sangha, our own masters, and those in other sects. We don't consider the acts that they do as the virtue that they do as being virtue and don't rejoice in it. But that is not good. This is actually something that Che Gendudrup said in a song. What he said, that when we are in this land of Tibet among the people, there's a song about saying who's developed the actual cherishing of others in our own thing. We talk about upholding our own teachings, but we look at, but we see all other teachings as not being valuable, and so that. And when we do that sort of action like that, that is a way of actually rejecting the Dharma. Because all of the teachings of the Buddha and all the thing that Buddha Dharma is teaching, all the teachings of Bodhisattvas are great virtue. So all of these are the actual cause of the teachings declining is when there is conflict in between the teachings. And so when there becomes that conflict, then that is the cause that will cause the destruction, the disappearance of the teachings. This is what is prophesied in the sutras. And so we all need to be careful about this. And so it is very important for us to appreciate the acts of all of the teachers who uphold the teachers. And when you talk about the people who uphold the teachers, this is a big name. We say, oh, you're a Kempo, you're a Rinpoche, you're a Tulku, you're a great master. And we give them a great name. We make a nice certificate, a big letter of praise, something that they can show up. There's nothing that we show like that. But but as it is said, if you tame the demons in your own being, then that is the teaching of the Buddha. So if you use the antidote for the obscurations, the negative unions in your beings, if you're an individual who can do that, then you are someone who is upholding the teaching. So in brief, the Buddha's teachings are upheld with our minds. We don't hold them up with our mind. We don't hold them up with a stick. We don't make a big heap of earth and rocks and do some sort of protection for it. We don't do it in that way. The way we uphold the teachings is by training in the three trainings. In that way. And if we are able to maintain the three trainings in our being, then that is upholding the teachings of the Buddha. So it is important for us to understand upholding the teachings in this way. So please don't distinguish between the different our sangha, our monastery, our school or something. Basically, whoever it is who does something good, wonderful, beautiful, we should say, oh, that is good. This is a wonderful thing that you do. It's really amazing that they've done that. And seeing that sort of way of thinking is really important. Now there's a story about this too. Maybe there's too much for today, I don't know. There's a story about the king Prasenajit. So Prasenajit was a great sponsor of the Buddhist teachings. So every week the King Prasenajit made an offering to the Buddha and his entire sangha. And so at that point there was a beggar there who rejoiced in King Prasenajit's offering to the Buddha. And the Buddha made the declarations, and when the Bhagavan Buddha made the dedications, he asked King Prasenajit, should I dedicate this to the one who had the greater material, or the greater matter, or the one who had the greater merit? And King Prasenajit said, oh, you should rejoice in dedicate it to the greater merit. King Prasenajit replied, The Buddha asked the Buddha, should you ask about the greater merit, the greater physical things, or the greater actual merit? And so the so the Prasenajit was making 7 days worth of offerings, and so the first few days, the Prasenajit said, "Please make the offerings to the dedications to all those who have the greatest merit." And so for the first few days of the offerings, the Buddha made the dedications to the beggar. And after a couple of days, then Prasenajit became very kind of worried about this. Why is this that I'm making all this offering, and all of the merit is going to the beggar? And so then all of the masters, all the ministers said, and so on one day, the king's ministers they gave the leftovers after the feast to the beggar. And when the Buddha was making the dedications, they actually tipped over his food and they stepped on it and they made it inedible. And the beggar forgot to make the dedication. And so that day, the Buddha made the dedication to the king. But when we make great offerings of many things and great great offerings, if you're someone powerful, there's the danger that offering will become mixed with pride. But the best way, the best way to gather the merit is to make the offering of a rejoicing. So it's important not to be jealous of it. Whatever that we see, we should joy with our bodies. We should joy in our palms. We should recite praises with our speech and rejoice in our mind. And if we do that, this will bring us a great result. And so basically rejoicing is the antidote for jealousy. Otherwise, if someone else does a great virtuous thing, and maybe it's someone who has a great status or great rank, there's the great danger that person might actually, get jealous of the people of their equals. So sometimes, then these people like this, they see someone else helping create a great monastery, a great sangha, and they start getting jealous of this. And so the antidote for this is rejoicing, and this is why rejoicing is so very important. Now following this is the request to turn the wheel of Dharma. The request to turn the Dharma wheel reads on the top of page 113, the second line. I request all those guardians who have wakened to Buddhahood and found detachment, the lamps of the worlds of the 10 directions, to turn the wheel that cannot be surpassed. Oh, I'm having trouble remembering that one today. It's easy. Now, when you're talking about turning the wheel of Dharma, the request to turn the wheel of Dharma is, from one perspective, sometimes we have pride about the Dharma, and that brings us an obscuration about the Dharma, right? That sort of happens, that we get prideful and have this aspiration, this obscuration of the Dharma. So by requesting to turn the wheel of Dharma, we can gather great merit and it's a very praiseworthy act. For example, the Dharma of the Buddha is like the wheel on a chariot. It goes to the other side of samsara. But if you don't turn the wheel of the cart will not go. So if the wheel does not turn, the cart will not go. But if you turn the wheel, then the cart will be able to actually move. And so when we actually turn the wheel of Dharma, It's not. It's not just a question of just. It's only when we ask the Buddha turn the wheel of the Dharma that it will turn, and we'll be able to go to the other side of Dharma, of samsara. And so when the Buddha turns the wheel of the Dharma, even if he only says one word, then it is something that we can think about. So, for example, those who don't respect the Lama, you teach about the spiritual friend. Those who cling to permanence, you teach about impermanence. Those who cling to themselves, you teach about selflessness. For those who cling to their own meaning, you teach them the teachings of the Mahayana. For those who are appropriate for the Vajrayana, you teach them the teachings of the mantra. And so this way you teach people what is appropriate to them. And so it's like we've teaching about, you teach them the appropriate level for that. And so in this way, it's like we're able to take steps along the stages of the path. But in any case, when we talk about the turning the wheel of the Dharma, even if it's only a single word, actually this word has a great deal of meaning. As it's talked about in the White Lotus Sutra, even within the entire Billiform world realm, that there's no place within that, there's not even a place the size of the tip of a pin or of a single atom that is not encompassed by the teachings of the Buddha. Even if that entire Billiform world universe were only the size of the pen of a needle, the tip of a pin, then there's no universe even of that size that the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas would not have done Buddha activity. And so this is a story about how the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas go for a single verse will go into any universe. And now here we have this place, and we don't have just a single stanza of the Dharma. We have many stanzas, and these are things that have great value. That great value without any attachment, and so. And now whether we have this great fortune to be able to encounter all of this Dharma is an incredibly auspicious, wonderful opportunity. But it's like if we put all of the words of the Buddha but sometimes we just line them up and we don't think of them, we just think of them as something to there. We don't think of them as being fortunate as we are. But turning the wheel of the Dharma, when we talk about asking them to turn the wheel of it, there's a reason for it. We need to think about the benefits of it, the reasons for it. And when we think about the benefits, then we ask them to turn the wheel of the Dharma. When the Buddha did come to this world to turn the wheel of the Dharma, but as he said, deep peace, unelaborate, luminous, non-compound, like nectar it is, this Dharma I found. Whomever I teach it, I would not understand it. And so with that teaching, I'll stay in this wood. He thought to himself. So he thought it was too profound and peaceful for people to understand it. So he spent 49 days staying in the forest without speaking for 49 days. And so it was only when someone came asking him to tell the Dharma that he could tell the Dharma. So it's like someone had to come and say, please be kind, please teach us the Dharma. Like there was a Khenpo who really liked it. I don't remember his name. There was this Khenpo who really enjoyed studying. He loved studying. And and he'd go everywhere. He'd always study and always ask people, "Oh, please teach me this. Please teach me this." He went to the Bodha Stupa and he asked people, "Oh, please teach me this text. Please teach me that." And so, in the same way, we have to go to the. It's like we can't really go to the Buddha and say, "Oh, please, Buddha, teach me the Dharma." I mean, if you really insist, maybe you could do it, but it says in the Vinaya Sutra. It says the Buddha said he does not do what he's not asked. So basically, you can only give vows and so forth. Give to the Dharma to those who ask for the Dharma. So people who have the peaceful imprints of Dharma, karmic imprints, and people who are interested in the Dharma. And when we talk about this, this deep, it's peaceful, it's naturally radiant and luminous. It's non-compound. It's unelaborate. It has no conceptual elaborations. And anyways, there's this deep, profound Dharma that has these 5 characters: deep, peaceful, luminous, unelaborate, and non-compound. There's no Buddha that does not know this Dharma, but we actually have to ask the Buddha to teach this Dharma. But this is the responsibility of the teachers, of the students. That you could say it's the responsibility of the students, because teaching the Dharma depends primarily upon the students. So it's important for the students to ask for the Dharma wheel to be turned. Following this is the request not to pass into nirvana. As I said yesterday, the Buddha, as I said the other day, the Buddha first developed in bodhicitta. He then spent three interminable eons gathering the accumulations, then awoke to Buddhahood. And the reason for this is to teach the Dharma. And so, for the student, those bodhisattvas with pure perception, he primarily has the Sambhogakaya forms. And for other beings, he has the Nirmanakaya that he displays. Displays the different types of the kayas of the Buddha until all sentient beings attain liberation and omniscience. This is a feature of a trait of all the Buddhas, but we Buddhas. But it's important for us to request the Buddha to request the Buddha to stay and to teach the Dharma for this. So there's not too much to say because there's no time actually. So here, now all of us who are just childish, ordinary individuals, the Buddha cannot actually teach it to us. We don't have the opportunity or the fortune to be able to meet the Buddha. The Buddha passed away 2,500 years ago, and so even if, no matter how fortunate we are, we don't have the fortune to meet him. There's an innumerable number of Buddhas in the times, but it's difficult for people who lack fortune to be able to meet them or to follow a spiritual teacher. So basically, the one who, for our ordinary individual whom we can follow, the one who we can ask for teachings, if we have the fortune to do that, are the spiritual friends who take the form of ordinary individuals. As I said during the teachings on the lamp for the path of enlightenment the other day. So, just when we think about it, it's not like we have to say, there's one or two now. It's not like we're talking about the great lamas right now. There are all of the lamas who, we need to remember the qualities of all the lamas who uphold the teachings, and we need to think about these lamas, appreciate them. Today and this year in particular, we are remembering the we will have a short ceremony to recall the great kindness of Kyabje Trungpa Rinpoche, Tenga Rinpoche, and Khenpo Tsultrim Gyatso Rinpoche, and to ask them not to pass into nirvana. And so this is something that and there we can remember how kind all our lamas are to us in terms of the dharma, the material ways, and various ways. But the greatest lamas for us in the practice lineage, the kindest to us, is to remember to. It's important for us to appreciate them and to remember their kindness. And in particular, for all this, there's like we have the Dalai Lama, who is like praised as being a second Buddha. You know, if we can see his face, listen to his voice. We have this incredibly wonderful opportunity to be able to follow him. But I don't know whether we actually know about our good fortune. In brief, basically we have lots of good fortunes. It's not a question that we don't have good fortune. We have good fortune, but if we don't realize that good fortune is a good fortune, then that good fortune won't be able to have any meaning for us. It doesn't like the good fortune is going to say, "Hey, I'm a good fortune." We have to recognize it. We have to remember that we have this good fortune. Otherwise, it's like the people who have. So, like the people who have. All the people who. It's difficult for us to find people whom we can find who are protectors or guardians for us. And now. We don't have to do any particular great difficulty or hard. If this is something we see, these are people who we can see in our own beings. And so this is a great kindness that they have given us. So in brief, from prostration all the way down to the request not to pass into nirvana, all of these practices are as I said the other day, these are all things that we can practice that we can do. We can all talk about them as ways that methods, tools that we can use to tame our own mind. There's not a single word of Dharma that was not taught as a way to tame our minds and to pacify our minds, to give ourselves peace and happiness. Otherwise, all the stuff that I've talked about, it's like, it's like you have the ghost on the east and you put the Torma in the west. It's like the story that I said the other day. There's a story about this. So, I always look at stories, So once there was a guy who had a big boil somewhere on his neck, and he had this great that started to give a lot of pus, and he went to a lot of different doctors, and so then Drupal Kunli had a lot of ammunition. So he thought, well, if I go ask Drupal Kunli about it, it'll help. And so then he went up to Drupal Kunli and he said, and so. And so then you need to make like made a torma or something. And Drupal Kunli said you need to make a torma for this. And so this person and so he So, 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 uh, so, I'll say so. The Drupal Kunle person told him to throw out a Torma, and so then he said, and so so Drupal Kunle said, you have to throw a Torma away. Well, then the person said, well, where am I going to throw the Torma? Because there are Buddhas, on all the directions of the mandala, so I can't throw it there. And so Drupal Kunle said, well, the man said, well, where should you throw it? And so Drupal Kunle said, well, you should throw it at the throat. And then Drupal Kunle said, well, okay, give me the Torma. And then he threw it at the guy, and it hit him, and then it hit that boil, and it burst, and all the blood came over everything. And so there are many different methods that we have, many different things that we do to avert enemies and so forth that we try to do. But actually the most important enemy we have is the one that we carry within ourselves, the ghost in ourselves. It's no matter how hard we try to the outer enemies, we cannot do anything. But the actual enemies in the internal enemy we have of the three afflictions, the three poisons of the afflictions, and we absolutely must. So every day, or every day, or every week, or every month at least, we have to see how we're doing with it. See how well we're doing. We have to see, well, how is it doing? What afflictions do I have? And what remedy can I use? And if we don't do that, then it's difficult for us to actually improve our Dharma practice. And so for all of us, we need to make sure that our Dharma works as Dharma, and that our instructions work as instructions, and that the mantras work as mantras. And so if we do not do this, then there is no one else who can do it for us. The main thing comes down to whether we can tame our own minds or not. It's not like we can do it in just a couple of minutes and do it. It's very difficult, like we can go to a store and something and get it in a moment or two. But basically, the direction that we turn ourselves, the aim that we have is that we tame our minds. And then for that purpose, we think that whether we are making making aspirations or whatever we're doing, that we're doing this as for this aim. And whatever we're doing, if we do it for that aim, then I don't think there's a problem. And so if we take that, but if we don't do that and we instead, put the Dharma and that aim to the side and then follow some other aim, then it is difficult for our Dharma to work as Dharma. The aim of the Dharma is to tame our minds, and our own aim is to take long life empowerment, to have a long life. It's to have good health, so we take care of ourselves. If we recite Tara, if we don't have children, we recite Tara to have children, or sons or daughters, and in this way, so we each hold on to our own aims. We have our own worldly, temporary aims, and we practice with that end. Then that doesn't fit with the actual aims of the Dharma. If it doesn't fit with the aims of the Dharma, so then it no longer becomes a way of working towards Dharma and towards the Dharma. Actually, what we really need to do is we need to use our body, speech, and mind for the aims of the Dharma, but we don't do that. We turn ourselves in the wrong way. And if we do that, then it's hard to really work with the Dharma. So we can say things with our mouths, but it's actually difficult to actually put it together. Maybe it's difficult for you, but maybe all of you are extremely fortunate people and don't have any difficulty. But at any rate, it's important for us to be very careful about this. In particular, even if we only recite a single mani, we are here in this sacred place. Many of us are prostrating here, we're circumambulating the stupa. We've come here, we're reciting mantras and so forth. Many are making offerings of butter lambs. At any rate, we're all doing things meritorious ways, whatever we feel like doing. And in this such a great time of such a great fortune, there's no point for me to talk about a lot of unfortunate things. But basically, when we're talking about virtuous things, whether virtue actually is virtuous, depends upon the way we think and upon our virtuous. Otherwise, if we just make an offering of a butter lamb, it's difficult to say that that is necessarily just that itself is a virtue. It's difficult to say that a prostration itself is actually a virtue. Well, maybe I'm telling too many stories, but I won't tell this one now. But in brief, we don't come here. We only come here once a year, and so it's like we've come to that time in the calendar when we have to gather here for. So no matter how much expense we have to send to get here, and no matter how much money we have to spend to get here, we come here. So this time that we come here now in Bodh Gaya is here. And so now we think to ourselves, oh, I've done this much virtue, I've done this many wrongs. And so for those misdeeds and wrongs, we need to think these are wrong, we need to regret them, and we need to rejoice in all the virtue, and we be excited about them, and think that we in the future will do things that are even more vast and wonderful and more excellent than those. We need to make that sort of an aspiration and and so if this way we have a sort of yearly review of what we do here, then that is be very good. And so in this way we all do our own acts. We all protect ourselves. We are all our own protectors. And so it's important for us that we need to do this properly without any mistaking. And I think that we are. So, often in Tibet they sing the song. The song is really helpful. It's talking about the song that says about. It's talking about people when they go on when they circumambulate in Manus, and when they start, they go Om Mani Padme, Om Mani Padme. Then at the faster they go Om Mani Padme, Om Mani Padme, Om Mani Padme. And then as they go more and more, then there's no manis left, and they're just having chit chat all the time. The external looks like virtue, but the inside is only non-virtue. And if we do it this way, this is a great danger of fooling everyone. So it's a real danger. It's like the danger of having a dharmic form, looking like a dharmic practitioner, but not being a dharmic practitioner. So look like to be to dharma practitioner, but actually we're someone who's really skilled in politics and manipulating people and so forth. And so this is not what we want. So there's not much to say about here. So now let's talk about meditation. Let's do some meditation. Should we call this meditation or what? Generally, when we think about parents, there are good and bad parents. Some bad parents don't take care of their children at all. It's like they throw them out in the trash. There are many parents who just kick their children out into the guys. Then there are also those who only abuse and neglect their children. And so in this way, there are good and bad parents. But most parents, generally, are good parents. The way I see it, So we all have our own way of saying things. But if it's not just your parents, it's okay. But basically, there's someone who's loving to us. Whether it's our loving parents, or a friend who's a loving friend, or a relative, or someone. There are many beings like this. And the way I usually think I'll I'll sort of give a report to you, I'll sort of share this with you. The way I usually think is, sometimes when we think about those people who are kindest to us in this life, the one who's been the kindest, we think about the people we generally think about people in our country as being kind to us, and particularly in terms of our body, we think about our parents as being the greatest kindness to us. It's not necessary to say this. So it's not just our kind parents who have given birth to us, but they're also the parents who have nurtured us, who have helped us. And there are quite a few of these parents who've taken care of us. From the time I was little, when I needed to put on clothes, or I needed to eat food, or even to wipe my nose, there would be friends and people who come even from far away to come and take care of me. And when we think about the kindness of some people like this, it's incredibly kind. Their love and affection and their kindness cared for me. And so no matter how much I've lived up to now, up to 25 years, it's because of their kindness and love that I've been able to live. And so this is a great kindness. If we think about it even in a more vast way, in this whole world environment, everything in the world environment is very kind to us. They're the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the air that we breathe. All of these come because of the external environment, and so it is very kind to us. So those who are near of us and those all around us those who are far away from us. Everyone is very kind to us, and very, very compassionate to us. And so it's very important for us to remember everyone around us and to have gratitude towards them and to appreciate them. And try to make we have to develop some sort of intention to remember them and to remember that gratitude in even small ways. And so now it's just the fact that we don't recognize each other as being parents, but actually there is not a single person here among all of us gathered here. There's none who has not been our parent. There's none who has not been our best friend. But because we are obscured by the obscuration of delusion, we do not recognize that. And then there are many people who we don't recognize that all these people around us are in the many thousands of steps of bringing us kindness, and we don't remember that. But we all have these very good connections with other people. And the fact that we haven't I think that the fact that we haven't remembered this and haven't remembered these good connections is just the most greatest we afflict us completely. It deludes us and afflicts us. And so this is... And so it's like, even if the person who's actually the most kind to us comes to us, we're not recognizing whom they're. And it's like we're inside this eggshell of not realizing this. So no matter whether we think about all around us, there are all these sentient beings who are all around us. So we should think to ourselves that I want to bring all these people out of the fire pit of suffering of samsara, bring them out of the suffering of the lower realms to liberation. And so we'll meditate for 3 minutes. And so now don't go asleep. So when you talk about meditating, means that we have to sharpen our minds. We shouldn't, go to sleep. And so please pay attention.